Hey guys, Mrs. McGathy here to help you with your summer assignment. Ideally, you are watching this video sometime in the end part of August or right before school starts, because I want this to be as fresh in your memory as possible. Your main assignment is just to read chapters 1 and 2 and do your best to fill this packet out. We will go over this stuff when school starts, so it's not meant to be this scary test type thing. I'm not throwing you to the wolves here. I just want you to get a jump start on the curriculum so that we can take the first unit a little bit slower so you feel more comfortable taking an AP course, because I know that as a 10th grader, this is probably your first AP course and it can be really scary and nerve-wracking, but you guys are gonna rock it and it's gonna be a good semester, good year. I am confident that you will do well, but the main thing is just, putting forth some effort in the summer to get this jump started so we can take our time with really learning how to read our book well and be successful. So let's get started with chapter 1. All right, so this is what every chapter starts with in the American pageant, and you'll see that it gives you the title of the chapter, the years that it covers in the chapter, and then this is really important. It points out the must-know events and people. These are always extremely important ideas, big concepts that you must know to have really fully understood the chapter. The other stuff will be helpful to you, but this is the stuff that if all else fails, you have to know this. These right here are just the key concepts from the College Board of what they want you to know. Really, before you start reading any chapter in terms of the actual pages, you should definitely be reading these. A lot of students like to skip it because they feel like it's going to take too much time, but honestly, this is going to save you time, because if you see things in the book that are not super related to these things that you've read, you probably could skip reading that portion. And we'll talk more about, how to figure out whether you can skim over stuff or not. But I'd say start right now by reading through this, pausing it, and then once you're done reading it, restart the video and we'll talk about the rest of it. All right, so after we've read our first section, let's go back here. So people in the Americas, the main idea that you should have been pulling from this is just that people from Asia migrated unknowingly to the Americas over a period of several thousand years, and because of the time in which those different migrations took place and because of the geographic locations that people settled in, we see a lot of differences in Native American societies within North America and South America because of that. The other things that we should have been pulling from this, if we're looking at our reading guide, so we need to be able to answer what was Native American society like before European contact, and this chart looks at different regions within the United States, present-day United States, and really the differences between these societies. I'm going to be honest with you, our book doesn't give us a whole lot in terms of filling this graph out, so for the purpose of our summer assignment, don't worry about this so much. We'll come back to this in class and talk about getting other resources to help us fill that out. But for this section, some of the main ideas that we should have pulled out is that maize was very important to Native American societies, and it's one of the major reasons that North America was able to develop some sophisticated societies, North and Latin and South America, because maize is corn. This is a crop that can be dried and stored for several years. So that will help societies to make it through tough times where maybe the crops didn't turn out so well. And it's also going to lead to more agriculture over hunting and gathering, which if you look at the history of humanity, that has often led to having different, social classes. And we see that happening even within Native American peoples in North and South America. So maize is a really important idea that we should have from here. But the other thing is that there's this myth that kind of surrounds Native peoples that they never changed their environment and they were really respectful to the earth. And that is not, wrong, the respectful part, but it's not that they didn't change their environments. They just didn't change it maybe on the same scale as Europeans. They were trying to preserve and conserve the land because they did really respect it and had different ideas about property ownership in terms of the land than Europeans did. But we see examples that they talk about where they would sometimes burn fields to help them with hunting and to keep grasses down and to prevent ticks and all sorts of things that, you know, totally reasonable things to do that we would think about. No one likes ticks, so you can kind of understand those sorts of modifications. But I would also be familiar with, from this section, Cahokia as being the largest settlement in the present-day United States. You know, be familiar with the three-sister farming and how that works, with the corn being the space for the vines from the beans to grow up. That's the kind of, if it's bolded, you should definitely be familiar with that. But in terms of answering this question, I mean, I wrote the page numbers for myself in case I were studying. You know, I know this stuff already, but in case I were studying, I would be able to go back and reference it. So that might be a good idea in your packet. But in North America, settlements tended to be small, with Cahokia being the biggest North American settlement at about 25,000. Hunter-gatherer society with agriculture as well. Maize cultivation was extremely important to them. Generally respected nature, but they did modify their landscapes. So I gave the example of burning brush and grasses for easier hunting. So that's kind of like what I'm looking for you to do here. And these are the sorts of things that when you're studying, you might want to make note cards out of that. We'll talk about what those look like in a bit. But that's kind of what we're looking for in this section. All right, so for this section, it's going to be looking at New World discoveries, presumably by Europeans. So what I want you to do now is read through this section. This is probably within the same vein of European exploration. Same here with Columbus. So this is going to talk about, okay, so this is probably going to be like the intermixing of the two. So read through here and then stop, and let's just kind of recap the major points from here. So these sections, like I just explained, are really looking at the how and whys for European exploration and conquest. And so some of the things that you should have pulled out in terms of the how and why would be things like the Crusades, the desire for exotic goods from Asia, middlemen taking up a lot of the expense of that, so they're making a lot of profit off of it. People want faster routes to Asia. There's new technology that allowed for it, like the caravel. You know, also in terms of exploration, Europe is not a super warm continent, so it'd be nice to have a warmer climate to grow crops that they can't grow in Europe. So those are the sorts of things that are being talked about there. So now, stop this again after reading. This is about the Columbian Exchange. So this is going to talk about like Europeans and the native peoples interacting with each other. So read that and then let's check in again. Okay, well, it looks like we have some stuff to catch up on in the packet. So I kind of talked about this earlier, so I'm going to let you answer these on your own. Just do your best. But this goes into what I was just talking about as well. So what factors led to the exploration? You know, fill that out. And then let's start looking at these pages, which is what is the Columbian Exchange and what are some of the results of the Columbian Exchange. So the Columbian Exchange is that exchange of goods and biological matter from the Old and New World, you know, back and forth, and Africa should be looped in that as well, as you can see on this diagram. But it tended to, if we're talking about big trends, it's going to have a more negative impact on the New World and a more positive impact on the Old World, because they're getting all these new, you know, crops and things that they hadn't had before that helps kind of fuel a population boom in Europe. But unfortunately for the natives, they hadn't had exposure to domesticated animals or the diseases, so that in a lot of cases ended up being the cause of death for a lot of native peoples, and it destroyed a lot of the habitats in North America, just because, again, these domesticated animals are going to end up eating up a lot of the kind of natural lands there. So those would be important things to talk about. Again, am I going in as much detail as you should on your packet? No. You know, on here you'll notice that I left you a lot of space. That's because you should write a lot of notes for yourself here. But the next thing is talking about how did Spanish colonization affect people in the Americas and Europe? And that could also be talked about here. in terms of the big trends of that section. But, so take a moment, write answers to 5 and 6. And then once you're done, pause the video and we'll move on to the next section. All right, so here they're going to be looking at the conquest of Mexico and Peru. And those ideas are going to kind of take us through the rest of the chapters, just talking about different colonization efforts by the Spanish and Portuguese. So there's some important stuff that you should be pulling out of that. So take a moment, again, stop the video, go and read those sections, and then check back in with me and we will take some notes together, talk about the big ideas from those sections. All right, so now that we're at the end of the section, question 7 says, what was the geographic extent of the Spanish Empire in the New World? So that is kind of found, I went past it. So this is shows you the Spanish claims and Portuguese claims, which were determined by this treaty here. So I would be familiar with that. What nations were challenging Spain's dominance? Well, again, you can kind of see the main one here. And then who was involved in the debates over the morality of native peoples? So that's really going to be found a lot in here, but also kind of sprinkled throughout when they talk about Bartolomé de las Casas. So he's an important figure, and Juan Sepulveda. So what are the major differences in opinion between those two is something that you should know. And we're going to go over all of this in class, but just make sure that you answer these questions, and I hope that this helped you somewhat get an idea of what we're looking for here.